today, all right, we're going to do something different. Usually for the Blind Ambition podcast, Rick and I have these great, brilliant guests, and we have these stimulating conversations. But you know what? Every once in a while, we just want to have fun with what's going on. Now, Rick has been with Blind for a long time, so he's so used to, this universe. I'm still the newbie figuring it out and getting a check, getting a vibe check about what goes on the site. And I got to tell you, it just cracks me up. It blows me away. I, as a recruiter, we spend most of my time on social media and LinkedIn, which is boring and dull. And like no one ever says anything that's, politically incorrect or just not nice. Now I'm Blind. I feel like I have my brethren here because I love complaining. I love arguing. I love fighting. I love just getting in the mix of things. And what really strikes me about Blind is that you have these people who are speaking anonymously, so they tell their truth, and what they say sometimes is wild. These are people. So if you're not familiar with Blind, predominantly it's tech oriented, but we're growing it out to Wall Street and finance and other sectors as well. And the folks there are highly accomplished. They work for FANG companies, really top tech companies. They're making 300, 500, 600, 800,000, $1 million, no exaggeration, total comp, lots of money. So very successful. And they are not embarrassed to talk about how much money they make and how well they're doing. And then even if you're making 800,000, they will complain they should earn more than that. So you got to check out Blind. We'll give you an invite, Rick, right? We could give people an invite how they can join up. So you can see what we're saying in real life and join it and take a look and be part of this family. So for today, rather than having the guests and being all serious, we want to riff on some of the things that you guys on Blind are talking about. And what we'll do is not only share it on Blind, but we'll share it on other social media sites so they can see what's going on. And Chris and Rick, if it's okay, one thing I want to start with is this. This is always drives me crazy. So you have this one guy, right? He's a PhD working for Salesforce. He's making $1.2 million in total compensation. $1.2 million. Now, I'll take this person at his word. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. I don't know. But let's, for the sake of the conversation, that he really is making 1.2. Now he's complaining. Hey, there's a lot of politics in the office now, and I don't really feel comfortable. And I have a new manager, and I don't know if I like my manager. So should I leave? Now, Chris, now you don't see Christine on, she doesn't like being on the camera, but Christine is the brains behind this operation. So you see her name up there. So she feeds us lines and stuff. She's brilliant. So Chris, Rick, if you are making $1.2 million, and let's say he's full of shit, right? And it's $1 million or even 900,000.
Right.
Do you just quit? Do you, or you just smile and you just ride this out? What would you do, Rick? What would be your game plan?
I mean, I think the craziest thing is
Yeah.
I'm not surprised by the total compensation figure or how they're describing the work culture at Salesforce, right? If you think about Salesforce, it is the largest private employer in San Francisco, right? Huge tech city. They are the number one. Their huge tower downtown, it is a landmark institution. And so when you have such a huge organization like that, there's a lot of bureaucracy, right? There's a lot of processes. At Salesforce, you have the extra added kind of Hawaiian culture theme. Mark Benioff, the founder CEO, is always talking about the Ohana. And so some of these things, I've never worked at Salesforce, but when I hear about it, I just roll my eyes, right? And so to imagine being there, this particular poster, they are an AI PhD. They
Mhm.
probably transitioned into industry from the academia, and they're probably just rolling their eyes just as much as I am and saying, gosh, is this what I really signed up for? And I think, Jack, the answer to that question is, yeah, this is what you signed up for. A job sometimes stinks, and you just got to wake up and go and do it, especially if you're going to get paid 100K a month, $1.2 million a year.
You're very perceptive because I didn't think about the PhD part in the sense that, yeah, someone comes from academia with a whole bunch of professors, and now you're thrust into Salesforce, it's a sales culture, right? It's like a hardcore sales culture, right? To sell whatever they're selling. What exactly do they sell, Rick? Like what's it's CRM kind of stuff, but it's like
Yeah,
what's
I mean, if you think about it, it's kind of maybe and I'm being very generous here,
yeah,
but we can call it kind of the operating system for
right.
work.
Hmm.
So for a lot of these huge companies, it is where they track their sales contacts, right? So that's the flagship product, the CRM, the customer relationship management database, you could call it. But it's also allows marketing teams to schedule and create editorial calendars for social media. So it's almost like everything in
Mm.
terms of what you might want to do to run a business. I believe there's also software that lets you create and build websites. So they're trying to be this full suite, but it's so boring, right?
So,
It's B2B, it's software
so
sales, it's
so this lends it to another. There's another post by another blinder where, and this is a younger guy, right? He's a younger guy. He says he's like 27 years old. He's earning about his net worth is 2.4 million. And he's looking for advice. He's looking for advice because he feels that he's being falling behind. So again, another money issue, $2.4 million for a guy who's 27 years old. Should we do a GoFundMe for him, or what do you think? Do you think his life is over and he should just pack it in? Like, what do you do if you're only making that much money and you're not even 30 yet?
yeah, I mean, it's really intense. I think,
Okay.
and I don't want to be like the diehard defender
Yeah.
of my community here as the
Go
PR
for it.
guy
Yeah,
for
be it.
Blind. Um, but it really is interesting just because I've seen it for the
Mhm.
last 3 years working here. Um, the kind of disconnect in terms of the personal finances when you're always comparing with the Joneses, especially on a place like Blind where compensations of packages of 300, 400, 500K are not uncommon, and even on the lower side of what you might see on Blind. Just the impact in terms of how many people that are in this situation, and they say things like, oh, I feel like I'm falling behind, or I'm living paycheck to paycheck. And then you break down and you see how they're describing their finances. You realize, 40, 50% might be
Well, you
lobbed
know what?
off
Let's
right from
let's do
taxes.
this. You know what? I don't mean to
Yeah.
cut you off because this is so important what you're saying, Rick. Dude, this is so important because it's not just for blind, but it's across the board. Anyone who lives like in New York, in San Francisco, in LA, in Philly, in these high cost areas. Let's break this down because you know we're kind of saying, oh, boo hoo, that guy's only making so much money. But when you really factor in what Rick's going to do, all of a sudden that money isn't so great. So can you walk us through what like the reality is after taxes and everything? Like what are you left with?
Yeah, I think, I mean, for most people, especially if you live in a high cost of
Mhm.
living area, you're living on the coast, you're living in a New York, a Seattle, a San Francisco, and LA, you're looking at maybe 40, 50% just getting chopped off right away from taxes. A lot of these
Wait.
folks,
So if you're getting 500,000, like right away, it's 250, just like that. Boom.
Nearly, right? When you're
Oof,
thinking about, the federal taxes,
oof.
all of the state taxes, the top tax bracket for federal is like what, 38%. In California it's a 13%. So like few of our members, they're reaching 51% in, marginal taxes, but it's getting up there. It's 40, 50, definitely, for sure.
So you have 250. What, let's say in San Francisco, you need to buy a home, right? Or you have a home. What did they go for? Like, if you have a family, let's say just two kids.
Yeah. So let's say that you have a $250,000 salary. After taxes, you might be at around 130 or so. And so let's say like net, that's about 10K a month, right?
Mhm.
If you think about a typical two-bedroom apartment, the rent is going to be somewhere around $3,000, $4,000 a month, right? And so you're left with 6K in that, funny example. When you think about having kids and you want to send them to daycare or a private school,
Yeah,
well,
can
that's
you
just
get
thousands of dollars
in
there as
certain
well.
areas, like in San Fran, can you go? Because I know in certain areas in New York City, that's one of the reasons I moved out to suburbs. It's just so you have to go to private school and it's ridiculous. So you're going to private school when they're like in elementary school. So that's probably like 10 grand, right? Or something like that a year at least for
It,
private
it
school.
might be, I don't know for certain because, I myself don't have kids,
Yeah.
but I mean, it's up there, right? It's these added expenses where a lot of these folks, they're losing, let's say, 40% to taxes. They're maxing out their retirement. And so that's what, another 20K a year. And so you're just seeing all of those, we're talking about thousands of dollars that are just coming out of your paycheck every single month. And it's a luxury to be able to put
Yeah.
aside, 20K a year and max out your 401k. I'll give you that. But I mean, I could see where these folks are coming from.
Is there also pressure, Rick, so that let's say a person is working for a FANG company, and for people who are not familiar with FANG, Rick, would you want to explain, to like a
Yeah.
larger audience?
So FANG is the acronym FAANG. So it's the top five tech stocks. So it's Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, and Google. You might also hear Magnificent Seven, which are the seven top tech companies that are really driving the returns for the S&P 500, the top 500 stocks in the US stock market. And so that includes names like Nvidia as well, Tesla. And when you are at that level, you are getting a lot of your compensation in stock, right? And so that's why you're able to see these high pay packages of 500, 600K, because a lot of it is based on how well these share prices, how they're trading, the stocks are just going up, and that's obviously increasing these folks' pay package. But the problem is, let's say I be earning 400, 500K, half of that or more might be in stock, and I can't necessarily eat stock, right? I can't necessarily pay
Yeah.
rent with stock.
Yeah.
I have to sell it.
Yeah.
And when I sell it, you're getting hit with the taxes, right? And so you might be losing half of your stock when you're selling it to taxes because you're not keeping it long enough for that 1 year capital gains cliff. It's getting taxed at these ordinary income amounts. For some of these folks, it's 30, 35, 40% when you're combining the state taxes there.
Now, if you're like in Seattle, New York, LA, San Fran, is there also the pressure, and I think you mentioned this before, to keep up with the Joneses so that now your next door neighbor is working for Netflix or working, for Tesla or what have you, and now you feel the pressure. Because I know, can I tell you, when I moved into my neighborhood, it's kind of an upscale area, and I was really concerned. Seriously, I was really concerned. Am I going to be like, the poor person there, and it'd be really uncomfortable for my kids and everything. So is that a thing where, in addition to the mortgage, in addition to the private school, in addition to having an automobile, and in addition to either getting a house and a mortgage or renting, Now you have to have all the accoutrements to show, look at me, I'm a player, here's the car, look at the car I drive, look at the, my clothes, look at the vacations we go. Does that factor in too? Where now you have to pony up that money to show like, all right, I've arrived, I'm important, I'm cool, I'm successful.
I mean, I think it's not necessarily a requirement as it might be, stereotypically as you might see
Mm.
in like an LA or so,
Yeah,
where it's all about kind of appearances.
yeah,
But I think it is very quick to get caught up in terms of these little luxuries, right?
mhm,
Like I know some of my friends, they never step foot into a grocery store, right? They are ordering their food from DoorDash 2, 3 times a week. And so when you have these kind of like huge expenses, because you're not going to the grocery store yourself, you're not making the meals yourself. You're taking Ubers and Waymos and all these, cab rides. These are all luxury products that I,
yeah.
I think people don't realize these are luxury services. Ride delivery, DoorDash is basically hiring a cab for your burrito, if you think about it, right? And so
You
there's
gotta
these
buckle in
things
your
where,
burrito with the seatbelt and everything? Okay.
right, you
Yeah.
get this lifestyle inflation. So it's less of
Yeah.
a maybe a comparison of, oh, my neighbor is at Amazon. There's certainly some of that, but I think it's very easy to just get caught up in, oh, all of these little nice luxuries that are available to me in like the tech capital of the world. Um, those have a huge cost.
Dude, you explained it so well because like, I think if people and I'm encouraging people to go on the blind side and check it out and you'll see they'll talk a lot. Oh, you're not making 600,000. What's wrong with you? Yes, you're saying it like, I think in my opinion, from an outsider perspective, partly it's showing off, but partly they know that everything Rick just talked about, that it's not as good as it seems because you have all these expenses. And I could see where now you have that pressure, the anxiety, the stress to keep up with everybody else. And, doesn't help when you see all these layoffs as well, too. So then you feel, hey, all right, after, all we're talking about in terms of the cost for everything, the house, of this, of that. Now, what if I lose my job? Like, what's going to happen? What if AI is going to take over my job? I'm a coder, I'm a software developer. Maybe within a couple of years, am I going to still have my job? So that's stress and anxiety, right?
Yeah, I think it's also, and this is my kind of personal finance
Mhm,
background, is folks just need to realize kind of what are they chasing in life, right? What is the meaning?
mhm,
I think, especially on blind, when you see so many people that do work in these high profile white collar jobs in tech on Wall Street that are pulling these huge compensation, it's very easy to kind of compare and say, gosh, well, these folks are making $1 million. I'm only making 400K, let's say,
yeah,
right? And you immediately off the bat feel inadequate because this guy's making more. Or alternatively, you look around and you see, gosh, like on Instagram, all these folks are taking first class vacations,
mhm.
jet setting around the world, right? Because you only see people's highlight reels, right? And I
Yes,
think that's kind of
yes,
the beauty of blind, where because it's anonymous, you're seeing a lot of, and we're making fun of it a little bit, but you're seeing a lot of these kind of
mhm,
insecurities or these concerns that are coming out
mhm,
naturally that you might not see on other social media, right? Where people are saying, gosh, I feel like I'm behind, or I'm struggling just being motivated by work. And that second part, I think, is really important to underline, because I feel like a lot of people, they go in blind, they seek out the interview advice, the compensation to negotiate, to get those bigger pay packages. And once they're there, they think, gosh, I tried so hard to get
mhm.
here. And maybe you've made it. Maybe you've landed that Magnificent Seven, that FANG job. You're earning that huge pay package. And you're thinking, gosh, like, is this it? Right? Like, what else am I doing? And you get into this almost like hedonistic treadmill of saying, well, I'm making 600K, my neighbor is making 700, or this guy in blind is making 900. And there's no kind of greater purpose that's kind of propelling them in the world. And you get caught up in just money, money, money. And that's when I think the problems start to come.
And also to add to it, we talked about this the other day with the NVIDIA podcast that we did, so that not, yes, you can make a crazy amount of money, but it's not guaranteed too. Because like before we had the NVIDIA,
Right.
podcast, the stock was just still killing. But then it dropped what, 10%, then dropped some more and dropped some more. So like, uh-oh, then you have to worry, is it going to keep dropping and dropping? And what's going to happen? Plus, from what I understand, from what we talked about with NVIDIA, that it's not like an easy coasting environment. A lot of hours, right? A lot of pressure, a lot of stress, working till 1 a.m., 2 a.m. I think Jensen, what is it? Jensen Huang, is that his name? The
Right.
CEO. So that he says he likes to torture people, like jokingly, torturing people to get results. So to your point, even though you're making a lot of money, you got to worry, hey, this stock that they're giving me may not actually be worth anything if something goes really wrong. And I can't, I got to keep grinding, and I got to keep, going, because I imagine if I'm not going to work hard, they'll just find someone else to take my place. Is that kind of what leads to this kind of burnout and just feel, because there's a lot of frustration, I know. So a lot of people are just very frustrated and burnt out. Is that kind of how these things play out?
I mean, I think it gets to this point where you try so hard, you're chasing
Mhm.
the money,
Right.
you get there, and then you realize, like, gosh, you almost have to like kind of tread water
Right.
because you've worked so hard to get here. You've practiced the lead code,
Right.
you've read blind for hours to get the interview tips, to negotiate your salary. And now you're thinking, gosh, like, how do I stay in
Right.
this role, right? How do I avoid that performance improvement plan? How do I avoid being defined as, a bottom low performer?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
that happens in some of these more competitive environments. You mentioned NVIDIA. I've heard TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductor Company, is also similar. Amazon is almost infamous for its performance review cycle, right? And being quite intense. And so you start looking at, gosh, like, am I almost not able to benefit from the fruits of my labor,
Right.
right? Because you're just so busy working. I think that's part of it. I think the big thing for me, I always kind of look back to first principles and whatever I do in my
Mm.
life. And I always try to look at my motivations and figure out, work is great, but this sounds really cheesy and new agey and crunchy granola, but
Yeah.
am I getting some
Yeah.
more reward for my work? Right? Obviously, there's the money reward, but is there some kind of psychic reward? Am I enjoying the work that I'm doing? And sometimes, I'm willing to accept lower pay because I have that autonomy, or I have that joy of being able to do something that I like to do, or something that I'm good at. And I think a
And
lot of folks, they're chasing, oh, I want to go study computer science and I want to become a software engineer because it's a high earning job, but they hate coding, right? And that's a terrible way to
wait,
earn
do
your
they
living.
like, but that has to be miserable. Like if
That
you're do if you
has
if
to
you
be.
hate coding, but you're kind of good at coding, but you hate doing it, and then oh my God, that got to be hell.
Or can you imagine if you're not good at coding and you hate coding, but you've been pushing yourself all the way to do it
Oh my
just so you
God,
can
that got to
land
be
these jobs?
stress. Holy shit, that has to be like the
Right.
worst. I would get that, Rick. I would get that from recruiting. So let's say a lot of times I recruit these attorneys, and these attorneys may be partners at the top law firms, right? Top, where
Well,
they are miserable because their parents drummed into them, you should be a lawyer, go to law
Right.
school. It's a safe job. You're going to make money. You're going to do well. And they're just miserable. Not everybody, but a lot, they're miserable. They may be good at what they do, but they're just unhappy. Now, not everybody, but like, yeah. So like, I didn't think about, I just assumed coders, dude, I'm an idiot. I assumed coders like love coding. I think, all right, you love coding. You put on your headphones and you listen to music and you just code. But it didn't occur to me that you would be just doing hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and just not really like it.
Yeah, I mean, I might be in the bubble because I grew up in San Francisco, went to
Yeah.
Berkeley. One of the most popular majors at Cal is electrical engineering and computer science. And I had so many friends where their parents said, "Hey, we're not going to pay for your school unless you major
And,
in computer science to get
yeah.
that job where you're going to not, pay back your student loans fast enough or have a good job." It's almost like the modern day equivalent of having your parents tell you, we're not going to pay for your school, or we want you to be a doctor or a lawyer.
Dude, I got these insight. I'm so glad we're doing this kind of call, this kind of,
Right? It's all the
podcast.
same.
Because like, I, I'm Flora. Like it never occurred to me. I imagine for most people, really never thought of it. They're thinking, oh, I made a wrong decision. I should have been a software engineer, and I would be so
Right.
happy and successful. And now you hear, oh no, this is a lot of hard work, and I don't know, maybe it's good I didn't go into that. I went to something else. Wow.
I mean, I think we get a little biased because
Yeah.
the folks that we bring on our show, that we interview, a lot of them, they're the CEOs, they're the founders, they're the CTOs, and they really do enjoy coding, right?
Mhm.
They were programming on their very first computer that their parents gave them
Mhm.
before they were 10, right? 12.
Yeah.
We've
Yeah.
heard so many of those stories, but I think it's like with anything else, these kind of like high profile, well-paying jobs, there's this hype around it, and some folks, they want to chase that clout, that prestige, that
Mm.
compensation, and maybe their heart isn't all the way into it. I mean, going back to what we spoke about at the kind of top of the hour, Jack,
Mhm.
that AI PhD at Salesforce, earning 100K a month, earning $1.2 million a year in total compensation. What is your advice to that person, that
See, number
professional?
one, yeah, well, number one, it makes more sense. Now that you walked us through all this, now I could see the full picture. But what I would advise people, I would advise that guy to do this. You're making 1.2 million, don't fuck it
Right.
up. 1.2 million, don't do anything stupid. Here's like if you're listening, whoever this guy is, if you're listening, Mr. PhD dude, come into work early, stay late, big smile on your face. Whatever your boss says, okay, boss. Anything negative, roll down your back, let it go. You come in, everything is fine, everything is great because you don't want to wreck it. You don't know what's going to happen in the future. So play this out as long as you can. Now, that being said, it doesn't hurt to keep your eyes open for other opportunities, even though you're doing really well.
Right.
But because you're earning, I would say earning 1.2 million is a pretty nice
Yeah, it's
paycheck.
not bad. Yeah.
So you don't want to ruin it. So if you look for a job, you have to be stealth. You have to be super careful who you speak with about it, the recruiters you use, when you interview, because you don't want to blow up your spot. So yes, I would say play the game. Play the game. Go make it like you're loving it, everything's great, even if you're not loving it. But to hedge your bets, you look for other things just in case and be careful about it. And then see how it plays out. It could turn out maybe you get a new manager and you love that person and you're like, oh, I'm so glad I didn't make any rash moves. Or maybe you're stealthily looking for a new job and then you're getting a $2 million, you know? So this way you
Right.
can kind of leverage. You just got to be very strategic about it.
Yeah, I mean, going to that strategic aspect, granted, my advice might be a bit dated because I haven't been
Mm,
interviewing for the
mhm,
last 3 years, right? My my
mm,
my feel of the job market might be a little bit off, but generally, when I look at a job search, I really do an inventory of what makes the most sense for me or what I want to prioritize in my role. It's a little cheesy, but I literally make a checklist and I almost do a stack ranking of what are my, non-negotiables.
mhm,
Sometimes earlier in my career, it was just about maxing out, trying to find a rocket ship. I was willing to sacrifice compensation to do what I love, right? Because when my thinking was, I'm in my 20s, all my friends are in my 20s, we're all poor together, we're all broke,
mm,
and so chasing that compensation less important. It's more about like building the network and building the skills. Now that I'm a bit older, have more responsibilities, obviously compensation is a bit higher up my list. Now, like things like work-life balance or being able to work remotely or having autonomy at work, those factors
mhm.
are really up there, and I'm willing to sacrifice some pay for it. Um, and I would urge this PhD. It sounds like they really don't like political work environments. And so when they're interviewing, when they're looking for their next job, when they're networking, I would suggest that they prioritize figuring
Yeah.
out what is that culture like? What is that relationship going to be like with my manager? And oftentimes your manager is actually going to be interviewing you, and so you can actually really get the vibes from this person and say, oh man, I'm interviewing with this guy named Rick. He seems like a jerk already. Can I work 40, 50 hours a week with him? Maybe not. So actually,
Yeah.
fuck this guy, right? Like, I'm not going to work
Yeah.
there. And you can figure it out really easily because in the interview process, maybe you've given this advice to your candidates, Jack, but the candidate is also interviewing the company, right? And it's
Yes.
also interviewing that hiring manager. And sometimes it's okay to walk.
Mhm. Absolutely. Absolutely. Just because they give you an offer, you don't have to take it. You keep your eyes
Right.
open, right? It could be, good offer, but you don't like the boss, you don't like the company, you don't like the culture, you don't like whatever. Absolutely. Hey, can I switch? Would you mind if we switch gears just a little bit?
Let's do it.
Like if we maybe one, I don't want to, start boring people. So we want to keep it going. But what about this? I'm blind. All right. There's some weird stuff, right? Some little weird stuff, not crazy, little weird stuff, little weird stuff. So, former Reddit CEO calls to fire incels. Like what? Like what is like can you make can you make it make sense? Like like wh- what subcultures are going on within the tech sector that we should know about that maybe other people don't know about? Is there something I don't something there? What's
Yeah, no,
is
no, I
there?
haven't heard of this particular case, but incel, involuntary celibate,
Mhm,
these are, guys that they want to find a partner, they want to be in a relationship, but for some reason or another, they can't, make that happen, right? And I believe this news article was something like the commentary from the CEO was incels are well represented in the tech industry, right? And they're creeping people out in the workplace. And I think that's kind of the angle that this former Reddit CEO was
yeah.
making, right? Where it's all about the culture. And if we have these frustrated dudes around, does it make the workplace a bit sketch? I think the answer is probably yes.
Is it specific to the tech world or is this like everywhere?
Now, I don't know. So the former Reddit CEO in this
Yeah.
case that made this comment, um, her name is Ellen Pao. And so I don't know Ellen Pao's kind of the context behind this statement,
Mhm,
but I imagine right now, and this kind of goes back to this conversation that we're having about these high compensation, huge pay package
mhm.
folks and the frustration, this mental health issue that they're dealing with. I would take a step back and say, generally, I think a lot of guys, they don't know what their purpose is and they're trying to figuring it out, right? And so they might be frustrated in terms of, gosh, I'm making so much money and I can't get a girl on a date. Or I feel like I should be further along in life. And there's almost this crisis of purpose
Mm.
that we're seeing more. I want to blame a little bit of social media, right? These highlight reels where people are just not really understanding what's real in life anymore. God, you add in AI and all these deep fakes, and everyone's sense of reality, I suspect, is just so distorted. And it's really hard to kind of keep up with what you want to do in life, right? For me, I've always been fairly grounded of saying, like, hey, I want to have just general joy in life and kind of take it from there. But for other folks, maybe they don't have that kind of North Star in their life.
Is it also this? Because I've been reading a lot about where Gen Z and I guess maybe younger millennials post pandemic, for men, particularly for young men, they're sitting in their parents' basement playing video games, smoking weed, not dating, and and the statistics on it is through the roof. Like, yeah, they're not dating, they're not getting married,
Right.
they're just, yeah. And I guess if you're in your basement, you're not going to meet women. You're not going to, so it's just going to be self-fulfilling and you're just going to be in that loop. And then you finally just shrug, you give up, I guess, and say, all right, I'm going to just be an incel. Sounds sad.
Right. I mean, I think that's the funny bit, right? Where early on in my career, early on in my life,
Mhm.
I worked in lobbying, and one of the executives at the lobbying firm I worked at gave me this advice. And it was paraphrased something to the effect of, Rick, always put yourself in a position where luck can happen to you.
Mm.
Like, try to prioritize that kind of serendipity, right? And so the example they used was, if you're on a Friday night and someone asks you last minute, hey, do you want to go grab drinks? Grabbing drinks versus staying at home and watching Netflix,
Mhm.
even if you go out for half an
Right.
hour or 1 hour, that going out for drinks, you might meet someone in terms of the next unlock for your career, the next unlock in your personal, relationship life. Like, putting yourself out there gives you that greater chance for something better to happen, right? Because you know exactly what's going to happen if you're staying at home and watching Netflix, right? You're going to have fun watching that movie or that TV show, and then you're going to pass out or whatever. That is a known quantity, but kind of setting yourself to give up these chances to have those like unknowns, that's where kind of the outsized rewards might happen. And this was at a lobbying firm, right? So you have a lot
Mhm.
of type A personalities,
Yeah.
a lot of folks that are just super extroverted. So there's obviously that bias there. But I think the kind of underlying thinking is probably right.
Now, Chris, I know you were quiet listening to us. From a woman's perspective, any topics that maybe we talked about before the show that you want to bring up, or any thoughts?
Well, to continue on from what you guys were just talking about, I think she brought it up within the context of trying to diversify
Mhm.
the tech sector and introduce more women and have more women work and feel comfortable working with these guys at these organizations.
Right. I think that makes sense, right? Have more of like that inclusive, less creepy environment. I
Yeah.
think is probably better for everyone.
I don't know where I saw this. Was it maybe China where they would have young, scantily clad women being in the office to motivate the software engineers? Am I hallucinating that, or was that a thing?
Yeah, no, I've seen those exact kind of posts as you, and gosh, what a different work culture.
Yeah, that's terrible, by the way. That should not happen at all,
In
where
Silicon Valley,
you should
wasn't
have hot women trying to motivate you at work. Yeah, that's terrible.
Wasn't it rumored that they would have hot women at like holiday parties, Christmas parties, in Silicon Valley?
Yeah, that was a common feature of holiday parties in the 2010s. That was that perfect era for that moment where you would go to these holiday parties, the Christmas parties, um, and they would be held at these like spectacular
Yeah.
venues, and they would have folks that go around. They were gorgeous, and that's what they did. They would just go and talk to guests, and that was you also saw that at like trade shows and conferences,
Oh yeah.
right? And so yeah, that was a feature.
Chris, any other things that we maybe didn't talk about that you feel would make a lot of sense, or you think we covered enough
I think
territory?
we covered enough.
All right. So I
Yeah.
think this is, I don't know about you guys. I think this is a great, this is a great pod because it's different. I think for people who are at Blind could really appreciate what we're talking about and hopefully not hate us and feel that we are understanding what you're all going through. And then when we post it for other places, they can get a good sense of, hey, here's what's going on. You know what? I like this vibe where, you could post, so you could post anonymous. You have to give your honest email address, but you could post so you could sign up. But then once you're on there, you could just talk like Rick and I are talking. You just be open and frank about things. And it's quite liberating actually, where you don't have to kind of censor yourself, where you can talk. And this doesn't mean like cursing, yelling, screaming thing, but no, you can really talk about how much you're earning or how you're feeling or, how much you want to make and so whatever it might be, but really to talk openly and freely. So I think it's a really cool place to check out. And feel free to let us know too, if you have any topics you want us to talk about, whether it's because there's a lot going on now, finding a job, interviewing for a job, what do you do if you get rejected? How do you bounce back? How do you get in? How can you network to get in front of the right people? So there are lots of things that we could talk about. So let us know where you feel, hey, I really need help with, such and such, and we'll be glad to do, these different podcasts because that whole mission is just to help people out and be happy and succeed and do well and have a good time doing it, as Rick was saying, and enjoy and have meaning and purpose. And that's what we're trying to do here and have a good time while we're trying to make people's lives better.
Yeah, and
So,
if you want to join the conversation
Mhm.
to the topics that we discussed, I'll be dropping the links to
Great.
those exact threads on Blind for you
Oh,
to
great.
hop right in and read through.
Fantastic. Excellent. Well, thanks, Chris. Thanks, Rick. This was great. Yeah, I think this is a great show. And hopefully we could do more of these.
Yep. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.